I told you we don't serve beggars here." The plate shattered on the floor, spraying food across the tiles. Steam rose from the mess, but the diner went cold. Clara didn't flinch. She stepped between the trembling old man and the sneering manager, her apron barely fluttering. Outside, rain hammered the windows. Inside, customers looked away, pretending they hadn't heard. Clara reached into her pocket and tossed her tips on the counter. "Then take it out of this." The manager didn't blink. "Not good enough, you're fired." She didn't argue, she just took the old man's arm and led him out into the rain. The next morning, as the sun cut through the clouds, the diner owner looked up and froze. 200 soldiers stood outside, full uniform, silent, unmoving. They didn't come for breakfast. They came for Clara. Clara James, 32, moved through the diner with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to blend into the woodwork. Her brown apron, frayed at the edges, hung like a shield over her faded jeans and white sneakers. Her ponytail, pulled tight, kept her dark hair from falling into her eyes as she scrubbed a ketchup stain off the counter. Her hands steady, despite the ache in her wrists from a double shift. In a town where the factory had closed years ago, leaving behind rusting machinery and peeling storefronts, being invisible wasn't just a choice for Clara. It was survival. Ridgefield wasn't much to look at anymore. Once a bustling stop for truckers and families on their way to Louisville, it had faded into a place where dreams went to rust. The main street, lined with empty shops and a single blinking traffic light, felt like a photograph left too long in the sun. Clara had grown up here, raised by her grandfather, Henry James, a Korean War veteran with a crooked back and a heart as soft as the cornbread he'd crumble into his chili. Henry had stepped in when Clara's parents lost themselves to addiction and bad choices, leaving her at 6 with nothing but a stuffed rabbit and a suitcase of mismatched clothes. He'd raised her on stories of honor and discipline, his gravelly voice weaving tales of soldiers and sacrifice as he puffed on his old briar pipe. "Honor's quiet, Clara," he'd say, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's like sweeping the porch for guests who might never show. You do it anyway." When Henry passed 3 years ago, Clara didn't cry at the funeral, not because she wasn't breaking inside, but because she could hear his voice. Stand. Tall, even when you feel small. She'd buried her grief deep, tucking it alongside the shoebox under her bed that held his war medals, a folded flag, and a pair of dog tags worn smooth by time. Since then, she'd poured herself into work at Billy's Diner, opening before dawn and closing long after the last regular shuffled out. No one asked why she took every shift she could. No one asked much about Clara at all. Her life was a patchwork of small burdens and smaller kindnesses. She lived for Smokey, her one-eyed tabby, who waited in their cramped apartment for the spoonful of tuna she'd sneak from the diner's break room. She lived to pay the rent, though that had gotten harder since her roommate, Tammy, lost her job at the Dollar General and skipped town, leaving Clara with an overdue utility bill and a landlord who didn't care about excuses. She'd moved into a rented room above an auto garage, a place that smelled of motor oil and creaked with every step. The single outlet sparked if she plugged in her kettle wrong, and the bathroom faucet wailed like a banshee, but it was a roof. And that was enough. Her savings, $64.38 and dropping, kept her awake at night, but she still rose at 5 a.m., walked to the diner in the rain, and smiled at customers who tipped in nickels. She didn't complain when coffee splashed on her shoes, or when the cook, Eddie, barked orders through a haze of grease. She didn't argue when her paycheck came up short, and the owner, Wayne Becker, told her to be grateful for the work. Clara noticed everything, though. She saw the way Mr. Hargrove, a widower who came in every Tuesday, stared at his coffee after his meal, as if it held answers he couldn't find. She noticed the bruises on the new dishwasher, Tommy, who flinched when anyone moved too fast. And she especially noticed the strangers who slipped in from the rain, asking for water in voices so soft they seemed afraid to be heard. Her life was a balancing act, serving, surviving, and carrying the weight of a town that barely saw her. She'd sit with Smokey curled against her hip, her grandfather's dog tags in one hand, and whisper, "We're okay. We're still okay. But the truth was she was tired, not just in her bones, but in her soul, worn down by the endless swallowing of injustice and the pretense that everything was fine. It was a Tuesday, quiet as any other, when the diner doctor creaked open, letting in a gust of cold, wet air. Heads turned briefly, then away, as a man stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone. His military coat, once a proud green, hung in tatters, the faded U.S. Army insignia barely clinging to the sleeve. His gray beard was patchy, his left leg wrapped in dirty gauze, dragging slightly as he moved. His hands, scarred and trembling, clutched a crumpled paper bag to his chest, like it was all he owned. He scanned the room, not for a seat, but for permission to exist, his eyes carrying the weight of pride and pain in equal measure. Clara, wiping down the counter, didn't flinch. She saw her grandfather in the man's stooped shoulders, in the way he held himself together despite the world's indifference. He shuffled to a corner booth, not sitting, just resting a hand on the backrest as if it might collapse under him. Clara approached, her damp apron swinging, towel in hand. "Evening," she said softly. "Can I get you something warm?" He didn't meet her eyes at first, staring at the cracked linoleum. "Just hot water, ma'am," he said, his voice low, cracking under the weight of asking. "Maybe a crust of bread, if it's headed for the trash." Clara's breath caught. She'd heard those words before, in her grandfather's stories of a rainy night in Busan, 1952, when a stranger's kindness kept him going. She nodded. "I'll see what I can do." In the kitchen, a returned order of chicken and dumplings sat under the heat lamp untouched. Clara plated it carefully, adding extra buttered bread and a steaming cup of coffee. She carried the tray back, setting it before him. "This was sent back just now," she said, her voice steady. "Still hot. Coffee's on me." He looked up, startled, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I can't pay," he said, almost a whisper. She smiled. "It's already paid for." He stared at the tray, hands trembling as they closed around the coffee mug. "You remind me of my wife," he murmured. "She said everyone deserved warmth, especially those who've known too much cold." Clara blinked back tears, her throat tight. Across the room, Wayne Becker's eyes narrowed, his mouth already forming the words that would cut deeper than the storm outside. But Clara wasn't thinking about him. She was thinking about the man before her, someone who'd fought for a country that now passed him by. He ate slowly, each bite deliberate, his posture straight despite the pain in his leg. He didn't complain or beg, just savored the meal like it was his first in days. When he finished, he looked at her with watery eyes. "You saved a soul tonight, miss. Might be broken, but not forgotten." He reached into his coat, pulling out a rusted dog tag, its chain frayed. "Name's Eli Turner," he said, pressing it into her palm. "If I don't make it through this winter, I want someone to know I existed." Before she could respond, he stood, limped out, and vanished into the rain. Clara stood frozen, the tag warm in her hand. Something had shifted inside her. Not the world, but her place in it. She'd done something that mattered, even if no one else saw. Then the door slammed open, and Wayne's voice shattered the moment. "What the hell are you doing?" His thick frame filled the kitchen doorway, his eyes locked on Eli's empty plate. "This ain't a charity, Clara. I told you we don't serve beggars." Customers stirred their coffee, looked at their phones, anything to avoid the scene. A woman in the corner whispered to her husband, "That's what happens when you bring trouble inside." Clara stood tall, the dog tag tucked in her apron. "He's a veteran, sir. I gave him food that was going to be thrown out. I paid for the coffee." Wayne slammed his hand on the counter, the sound like a gunshot. "You made me look soft. You don't run this place." His finger jabbed toward the door. "You're fired. Get out." The diner went silent, colder than the rain outside. No one spoke for her. No one stood up. Clara untied her apron, her hands trembling, and walked into the storm, her shoes soaking through in seconds. She stood under the awning, heart pounding, but she didn't cry. She couldn't afford to. A rustling came from the alley. Eli appeared, his breath shallow, his eyes still burning with that quiet fire. "I saw what happened," he said. "I shouldn't have let you pay a price for me." Clara shook her head. "You didn't do anything wrong." He pressed the dog tag into her hand again. "You reminded me I'm not invisible, child." Then he was gone, swallowed by the gray. That night, Clara sat in her rented room, Smokey curled against her. Her wet clothes hung over a chair, the street lamp casting slanted shadows through the blinds. Her phone showed 42.12 in her account, rent due in 10 days, no job, no plan. But she had courage, and that felt like something. She traced the dog. Tags, faded letters, Turner, Eli J. F472, wondering what battles he'd fought, what he'd lost, and why Ridgefield had forgotten him. By morning, a teenager's video of the incident had gone viral. The shaky footage showed Wayne's tirade, Clara's quiet resolve, and the empty plate. Comments tore her apart. Rules are rules. She's probably been stealing. Her co-workers unfriended her. One messaged, "Always playing hero." "How's that? Working out?" She applied to 3 diners that day. One manager said, "We can't risk the attention, honey." Another slid her application back without a word. By dusk, Clara wandered downtown, the dog tag heavy in her pocket. At a bus shelter, she saw Eli curled under a plastic sheet, clutching his paper bag. She knelt, left half a sandwich, her only food, and whispered, "Thank you for remembering me." She didn't see the black military vehicle at the corner, or the uniformed man inside making a call. Dawn broke, the rain gone, leaving Ridgefield's streets shimmering with puddles. At 6:45 a.m., a low rumble stirred the quiet. Black SUVs rolled down Main Street, stopping outside Billy's diner. A man in a crisp army uniform stepped out, his chest heavy with medals, followed by 200 soldiers, Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, in perfect formation. Cars slowed, shopkeepers stared, and a crowd gathered, phones out, sensing something extraordinary in a town where nothing happened. Inside, Wayne dropped a glass when the bell jingled. The officer, Colonel Matthew Turner, stood. "Did "I'm Eli Turner's son," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "The man you called a beggar saved my life in Iraq, carrying me 3 miles under fire with shrapnel in his leg. He pawned his silver star to feed a homeless family." He held up the citation, its edges worn. "Your waitress, Clara, fed him when no one else would. She reminded me of the country my father thought he'd lost." Wayne's face paled, his eyes darting for support that never came. Turner continued, "He refused help for years. After my mother died, his PTSD worsened. We lost him until Clara." A corporal brought a black case holding Eli's silver star. Turner called for Clara. A reporter found her in her room, breathless. "The soldiers are asking for you." When Clara arrived, the soldiers parted, then saluted, 200 hands raised to a waitress. Her throat tightened, her breath caught. Turner placed the medal in her hand. "My father wanted you to have this." She shook her head. "It's not mine." He insisted. "It is now." The diner closed the next day. Suppliers cut ties. Staff quit. Veterans picketed. Wayne vanished within weeks. Clara didn't gloat or post online. A veteran nonprofit offered her a job managing a community kitchen in an old warehouse. Soldiers volunteered. Single mothers cooked. High schoolers served soup. Smokey watched from a windowsill, a one-eyed general. One afternoon, an 8-year-old boy approached Clara with $1 and a cookie. "My grandpa was a soldier. I saw you in the video. Can this help someone?" Clara, eyes wet, nodded, her hand over her heart. Eli now lived in a VA housing unit, visited by his son and young soldiers who listened to his stories. Clara carried his dog tag, kept the silver star, by her bed, and whispered her grandfather's words. "Honor's quiet." The headlines faded, but those who saw Clara's courage remembered. She didn't march or protest. She gave a meal to a man the world forgot, and that shook a town. In a world that overlooks its quiet heroes, Clara's story reminds us that honor lives in a whisper, a coffee, a warm plate, when no one's clapping.